Welcome to the first of 3 coach education workshops looking at the area of athlete fueling. For any of you that I haven't met, I'm Matt Lockett, National Endurance Coordinator for Athletics Ireland, and a volunteer coach in the west of Ireland with Galway City Harriers and NUIG Galway. When I started the role with Athletics Ireland, it's been a priority to try and reduce the number of athletes whom inadequate nutrition contributes to injury, sickness, loss of performance, and in some cases leaving the sport. So it's just so fantastic to see so many of you join us this Monday evening. We see the problems this causes with our international athletes, but often the problems start much earlier in athletes' development. And so personal coaches and club coaches are really key to improving the state of play with this. Understanding this area has really improved over the last 10 to 15 years. So hopefully the 3 workshops will prove to be useful for coaches to get up to speed and make sure they're in the best place to support their athletes. We've been working in collaboration with Sport Ireland and Bodywhys, and to put these workshops together. And instrumental in that has been Sunny Upu, so international rugby player. So just to say the questions direct through the Q&A rather than the chat function there. And if we don't get the panelists to answer them this evening, then hopefully over the course of the 3 workshops, we'll be able to get them answered for you. So over to Jessie's going to start us off, who's one of the nutritionists with Sport Ireland Institute, and is going to kick things off.
I'll have to correct you quickly, Matt. I'm psychology. It's
sorry.
Good start.
Yeah, sorry.
We have Danielle will be covering nutrition. I'll just to start us off, as Sene mentioned, we are going to be doing some interactive stuff because we want to be as interactive as possible. We want to kind of understand the demographic of who we have on the call here today. So I'm just going to share my screen, and I want everyone to get to grab their phones. I'm assuming everyone has their phones there beside them somewhere. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to menti.com, go follow the instructions at the top of the screen. So if you go to menti.com on your phone, and you're going to get an option to put in a code. And so if you put in that code at the top of the screen, and you're going to get a chance to answer a couple of questions, just so we have a good idea of just basically who's on the call, what kind of groups you're working with, what your knowledge of REDS is, and just some other kind of things that we can refer to then during the presentation. So just give you a couple of minutes. And what the beauty of Mentimeter is that their answers are going to pop up instantaneously, as we're seeing here. So already you can see there's a really good mix of age groups being covered, which is going to be important because obviously when we're talking about REDS, there's no one specific age group that this is solely affecting. So it's good to know what kind of age groups we have with us. I'm assuming everyone can see that okay. I'm not just doing that thing where I'm looking at it, no one else is. Great, so we've 42 answered so far. I'll give it another minute or 2. We're at 48. You can probably see the little number down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. That's how many people have responded so far. So I'll give it another couple of seconds. So again, a good spread. Lots in the kind of juvenile kind of age group, which is obviously quite a high-risk age group. So it's good to know there's lots of coaches of that age group on tonight to talk to us or to listen to us. Sorry, someone has asked for the Menti code. It should be at the top of your screen there. I'm not sure if you can all see that.
Maybe just call it out, Jessie.
Yeah, so I'll call it out just in case you can't see it. So it could be below, it could be underneath something. So it's 49558352. So that's 49558352 for anyone who wasn't able to join. That would be the same for all of the questions. So if you haven't gotten a chance to answer this one, don't worry. The code will be at the top of all the screens. Okay, so we're kind of seeing a majority of kind of juvenile athletes, and then next up kind of athletes in their 20s. So I might move on. We kind of have a good spread of people, reached 59. So I'm going to move on to the next question. So again, it's staying with the same. You should have the next option is to rate on a scale of it's either 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. So it's 1 to 10. Yeah, it says on the screen. What would you rate your current knowledge of REDS? So it'd be good for us to know where people kind of rate themselves. So that number that's coming up is obviously the average of the answers so far. Hopefully that number will be higher if we were to take it again at the end. Okay, so the average is about 50%, 5 out of 10 knowledge, which is not bad. Okay, that number's staying pretty stable, 63. So yeah, about 50% knowledge we'd say for the group, which is good. Okay, so next question. And this is going to be just a text box, so there's no set answer. You can answer a full sentence here. So just as a coach, what you think your role is when it comes to athletes' rest, recovery, and nutrition, because obviously this is directed at you. You know, this is an area that we all work in, but you are the coach, you're on the ground with the athlete. What is your role in these areas? Sorry, question here. So someone has asked what the term REDS means. We are going to get to that. So if you don't know what REDS is, good thing you're here. And we are going to explain that in more detail in a second. So if you don't actually know what the term REDS is, you can put that in, that you just don't know. That's fine. So we're going to get lots of answers here, which is great. So I'll be able to scroll down slowly. So lots about guidance, education, which is great. Encouragement. These are the kind of words we like to see. A lot of the same kind of answers coming up. Advice, feedback, imparting knowledge, which is great. So it's great to see so many coaches have joined here tonight. Hopefully be able to come away from tonight feeling more educated and confident in your ability to talk about REDS with your athletes. This is great. This is great. This is pretty much reflecting what we're going to say ourselves. Oh, I don't know why that's come up so big. Someone's answers come up ahead of everyone else's. I don't really know why. Okay, I think we're kind of getting the idea that everyone seems to be on the same boat here. This one won't go away for some reason. So I'll move on to our next question. So we know what your role is. What do you think are the main challenges? Interesting. might be a harder one to answer. So if you don't have an answer, don't worry. It's great, some really good answers coming in. So I hope I'm not scrolling through too fast, but the answers are coming in thick and fast here. So lots of really good answers around knowledge, all the different access to knowledge, social media, parents. Yeah. So we'll be able to save all of these. These aren't going to disappear. These will all be saved in Mentimeter for me. So if we are sharing slides and stuff, some of these answers can be collated as well. So don't worry if you haven't caught them all. Give it another couple of seconds and then I'm going to move on because I'm conscious we want to get into the actual content. So I'm going to move on to our last question. So this is going to be something that is a common theme, is with REDS, your athlete, simple as, plain and simple, might be asked to eat more. As a coach, what would your thoughts be on this? Would you agree, disagree, whatever way you want to perceive that question? And then we're going to move on to hear from Danielle and Julianne and myself. Great, really good answers. Okay, so I think we're kind of getting from these answers, there's a lot of challenges in this area. So it's great to see that we have nearly 100 participants on the call tonight to learn a bit more about it and get some hopefully practical tips to go away and actually be able to work with your athletes. So yeah. Okay, so I'm conscious that we're 15 minutes in and we want to hear from the experts. So I'm going to finish up these, but I really appreciate the interaction. I think we've gotten some really good, and we'll be able to talk more again at the end in the Q&A. So I'm going to stop my share here and I'm going to hand over to Julianne.
Thanks, Jessie. So I'm just going to share my screen. I'll just launch into the presentation where Danielle is going to talk us through energy availability and an introduction to REDS. Floor is yours, Danielle.
Okay, thanks, Julianne. I suppose just to start off then, I'm sure a lot of coaches and practitioners are aware of energy balance, and it's simply energy in and energy out. Moving on to energy availability, and I think, Julianne, can you click on there? Yeah, and I suppose this is the key concept we really need to drive home with athletes as opposed to the energy balance equation. And that is because it takes into account not only your energy expended during exercise, but also the energy needed to fuel your bodily systems. So energy availability then is essentially the amount of energy you need to fuel your body's needs after we take away the calories you use during exercise. And if, for example, an athlete finds himself in a state of low energy availability, there isn't enough energy left over after exercise for your body to function optimally. And this is where we can see changes, for example, with a female athlete in menstrual function, and this can then have a knock-on effect then on bone health as well. So energy availability is reduced by a number of different reasons. And you just click, Julianne, there's another few that has to be, yeah, perfect. It can be reduced by a high training load. So high training load can have a suppressive effect on appetite. Also, athletes don't account for those non-training related activities. So for example, going for a 3-hour hike, maybe on a Saturday, on top of their training session, or maybe they're cycling to and from work or school. Also diets, restrictive diets that exclude different food groups, such as your carbohydrates, and clinical eating disorders then can also contribute to low energy availability. Inadequate meal frequency and low energy density. And I think I've seen a few of those answers, social media playing a role in that. So when we talk about inadequate meal frequency, you know, athletes think about the breakfast, lunch and dinner, but they actually don't think about how that fits around their training, and are they eating enough to, I suppose, ensure that they're getting enough in to cover their training and their bodily functions. Time constraints, timing between sessions. Timing between training sessions can conflict with eating opportunities, especially when maybe some athletes have 2 training sessions in the one day. Sport-specific demands, the perceived performance effect of that lighter being faster is a good example. Appearance filters in there as well. And then it could simply just be due to poor nutritional knowledge, not being aware of how much energy or how much calories you need to take in each day for the training that you're actually doing. So when we look at the prevalence among our athlete cohorts, we can see that in the Olympic and the higher elite populations, it's ranging from about 40 to 48%. And then in those lean or weight dependent sports like dancers or endurance like training like track and field, it ranges from 18 right up to 77%. So it does vary dependent on the athlete cohort. And again, there's little research in males because, which I'll get into now in a wee second, but the term REDS, I suppose, highlights that this is not just a female dominant problem. So the health consequences then linked with having low energy availability. So in 1992, a group of American researchers introduced the term the female athlete triad. And what this is, it's a progressive continuum whereby an athlete can go from an optimal healthy state. So in the blue triangle, they have optimal energy availability, normal regular menstrual cycles, and optimal bone health. But this can depreciate right through to a low energy availability state with or without an eating disorder. And this then has a knock-on effect on menstrual function and bone health. And worst case scenario is functional hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is the complete stoppage of menses. And due to the lack of menstruation, this then can lead, if going on for a prolonged period of time, can lead to osteoporosis later in life. Now, I suppose this concept has evolved. In 2007, I suppose they developed this continuum from the blue to the purple. And I suppose more recent research in endurance training population in a group of endurance training females highlighted that not only does low energy availability have impact on menstrual function and bone health, flick it again there, Julianne, but it also impacts your cholesterol levels, increasing cholesterol, your decrease in blood pressure, glucose, and a decrease in RMR as well. So we can see that it's a lot more complex than just menstrual function and bone health. And so, yeah, click on. So this is where the term relative energy deficiency in sport came out of. And in 2014, it was the International Olympic Committee that coined this new term to highlight that it's not only a female problem, but it can also impact males. And we can see that the triad is built in there to the health parameter of the REDS wheel. And it also has an impact on other health systems as well. And here we can see the effect on athlete health, but also to highlight that it can impact athlete performance. So decreased muscle strength, decreased endurance performance, increased risk of injury. And I think the performance wheel is far more impactful when you're talking to athletes, and potentially as a coach that you can see these things happening right in front of you. If you have athletes constantly on the physio bed or constantly dropping in and out of training due to colds and flus or niggles and strains. So these are more of the symptoms that you might be more aware of, as opposed to the physiological, the health element of that. Yeah. So last year, just like Jessie went through there a while ago, we had a group of coaches and athletes, I think 9 coaches and 9 athletes in total. And we asked them, you know, just to talk us through some of the challenges they identified. And I'm just going to go through some of these quotes because I think they cover such a broad basis, and I'm sure plenty will be able to resonate with many as well. So time and preparation, the actual time to eat enough can be very difficult, particularly for runners, because the mechanical motion of running can make it uncomfortable to eat anywhere close to training. The windows to get into the windows to get food into the athlete are fairly small post-training. And if an athlete is running twice a day, the window is then reduced to this block just before training. It's difficult to eat. And then it's this combined with work and study schedule. This means there's not much time between training and their everyday life, and that can make it really difficult. And I suppose that's true, that they do have these really busy schedules, and nutrition just seems to be pushed to the wayside. So that time and preparation for us, I suppose, to try to get athletes become aware of that is really important when it comes to nutrition. Budget then, but I think us not having the capacity or budget in terms of providing meals, I think that is a barrier, whether people like to admit it or not, because you can say all the right things and provide athletes with the right information, but if they have to stop in a garage and get a sandwich or a wrap or whatever, you're still going to have a percentage of the time where they're not going to make the right choice. And I suppose that's for many in clubs, they don't have the budget or the funding there to provide athletes with food. So I suppose it's making athletes accountable for bringing their own recovery, or potentially if there was a bit of funding that you could use that towards some of their nutrition, as it's every bit as important as their S&C, as their psychology, you know, to try and encourage them to keep on top of this element. Yeah. And the risk of weight gain then, it can be tricky on the weight side, because when people commit to that new way of eating, sometimes they can put on weight before they lose it. And it gets complex then at that point as to how they need to stick with it longer term, because it is a change that they can see benefit from in the more medium to long term. It's not just an overnight thing. And I think that's very common, especially with lighter athletes, that they tend to have this bump in weight, but reassuring them that weight will come down. It's your body adapting and changing to the increase in food, but I suppose that they have to make sure that they're getting their bodily functions operating first and foremost in order to make sure that they're in a healthy state to perform optimally. And then when we asked them about gaps in the Reds education, a big one for us was the perceptions in endurance sport. So there is a perception among some, particularly older coaches, that endurance athletes don't have a period, and that's normal. It's part of endurance training. It's not something that should be a warning sign or flag. It's accepted as being part of an endurance athlete. And the other one is there's a hell of a lot of medics that will still put a young girl on the pill just to bring it back. You know, and these are not like putting a female on the pill is not the answer. Fueling adequately and getting on top of your energy availability is far more important than going on the pill. Underestimation of energy intake and clean eating. So the general society view of what healthy diet is and the notion of a clean diet. I've had parents of athletes on national squads where immediately I've spent the day with the athlete, I would be concerned that there was an issue, and having spoken to the parent would say, oh yes, she eats really well, chicken breast and a plate full of greens. So the perception of what an appropriate and good diet is very warped really. So there's multiple challenges and lots of areas of education needed and lots of different groups to be educated. The next one, from my experience, we don't have a problem with athletes not eating healthy. They eat very healthily. If anything, they eat too healthy. And the last one there, I think there is that issue of social media and Instagram. I think that was brought up as well in the comments, and general body image. I can't see that now, it's my screen is blocking it. I can't. Can you see that at the bottom,
I think there is an issue of social media and Instagram and general body image, and that is very, very difficult for anybody to get away from.
Yeah, and I'm sure Jessie will cover that in more detail in a wee while. So I suppose just to round up that introduction on relative energy deficiency, so low energy intake and availability have negative physiological, so your health, your psychological and performance outcomes. LEA occurs in all sports and is more prevalent in sports where low body weight is perceived as advantageous or in endurance training populations. An athlete may be in an energy balanced state at a lower level with a stable body weight, yet still eat too little for all the physiological bodily processes to function. Knowledge about nutrition, striving for a low body weight, social media and the media influence, and many other factors affect our dietary habits. REDs may be caused by a lack of nutrition knowledge, time constraints for optimal sports nutrition, inadequate energy intake throughout the day, or it may occur due to a clinical eating disorder.
Great, thanks Danielle. So in the middle of the presentation here, we're going to break away from a slideshow format and we're going to utilize some of the infographics that we designed in the Institute last year. So what we're going to do is just chat around these. Matt has shared these previously on social media, so they should be available on the Athletics Ireland page. And what I'm going to do first from a physio point of view is just chat through this initial infographic because it's a bit information heavy, but these can be quite useful and they're designed for coaches to use in athlete education and also for yourselves to have as a go-to. You can have these saved on your phone. And they can be really handy in recognizing some of the signs and symptoms of REDs, because some of them you might think might be a typical response to training. And then other ones you might realize, okay, well, that maybe isn't so normal. And when it comes to an athlete and their well-being, the coach is the primary person that knows them the best. You're the person that knows their training inside out and their fueling. So you should have the best knowledge around how your athlete performs, etc. And the support team will always come and go and change. And that's the nature, unfortunately, as athletes develop and transition through their sport. So when you're coming to some of these, you may have a much better knowledge of an athlete's injury history than their healthcare provider may have. So one of the top things, I suppose, physically from us, from the physio-medical side of things, is if we're seeing an athlete coming in that's getting these recurrent injury niggles that you just can't get on top of. So they're coming in every few weeks or even every few months with a new problem that's impacting and restricting their training and impacting their performance and entry to competitions. They are one of the things that I think people kind of underestimate, because they think injuries and niggles are quite common to get in training, but you shouldn't be getting them all the time. And you shouldn't be constantly needing to go in and out of physio to keep on top of your injuries. Also, likewise with that, if somebody is breaking down constantly with illnesses, colds, flus, cold sores, signs like that, or if they're complaining of having that difficulty to recover after training, that if you increase their training load at all, that they're very, very stiff or sore, they're taking longer to recover from training, they're not getting that adaptation period or performance outcome that you'd expect from them. You know, that needs to be kind of a light bulb moment. Well, maybe they're not actually taking enough fueling in around these sessions, or maybe it's a case that they're not getting the timing right. And Danielle will talk a little bit more about that because that's hugely important. Some of the big warning signs, and I think these are some of the classic ones that people will highlight, is if somebody presents with a stress fracture or a bony injury, they always can be quite an important one. Likewise, Jessie will talk a little bit later around mood. And oftentimes, and even I had a coach last week that highlighted this in a team meeting, that they didn't feel that their athlete had an issue around fueling. And then when we discussed it further and they looked back on it, well, actually the athlete had been a lot more irritable, difficult in the training environment. And it was mainly signs of mood disturbance issues that had flagged her issue with REDs rather than some of the more physical signs and symptoms. Other ones can be low libido, rapid weight loss. They could be complaining a huge amount of disturbed sleep or feeling overly tired. And again, then when it comes to performance, they're not hitting the times that you would expect. So you've laid out a training program with them. They're maybe having some interrupted training sessions or not nailing the training program every single week, but still you'd expect their performance to be improving, those times to be getting better, and they're not. And the athlete is feeling and complaining of being tired constantly. So they're extra ones to think of that you may not have realized before. Along with these infographics then are just a few questions that you may ask yourself. So when you're thinking about low energy availability and how they can contribute to these signs and symptoms, the key things you need to ask yourself with regards to the athlete is there an imbalance between their training, nutrition and recovery? So Danielle will talk about this a little bit more in the next infographic. Are you getting your fuel in at the right time? So sometimes they could be actually getting all the fuel in, they could be following all the recovery strategies, but timing could be the issue. And I've seen that a lot with athletes over the last couple of years. And are you eating within that right window straight away after their training session? Looking at planning across a training week with recovery blocks is hugely important. And again, we have a nice infographic for that one. And adjusting your fueling and nutrition around your training schedule. And there's also a couple of nice quotes here from international athletes who had issues with RED-S over the years. So one athlete, a British male cyclist, highlighted, "I didn't really sleep. I was very anxious, moody, very, very regimented and very antisocial." So that was his main signs of an underfueling issue. "My training sessions, race performance and general energy levels began to plummet. The motivation became a competitive, to become a competitive athlete was not as strong as it had been." And then another New Zealand steeplechaser, "I began to feel antisocial, low in energy and failing in other aspects of my life outside of running." So like I was saying, these infographics, they do have a lot in them, but they're presented in a nice way as not to be kind of too overloading, but they can be very handy to have on your phone and to use as an educational tool when you're dealing with athletes or with their families when trying to talk about RED-S. So next up, Danielle, will go back to you, or do you want to do the other one first?
No, that's perfect there.
Oh, I lost it again. 1 second, sorry. Technical. And that's your Mentimeter, Jessie. It's just coming. Get out of the way. No, this one.
Number 2, yeah, 2 and 3.
Great. There you go.
Okay, do you want to zoom it up a wee tiny bit there, just so, yeah, perfect. So when it comes to balancing your training, your nutrition and your recovery, it's often a good idea to sit down with an athlete or either present them with a rough training schedule, just so they can slot in, priorities for them is on rest days, are they prioritizing their nutrition and their rest day? So for example, we can see here on Wednesday, so they have college, then they're meeting friends for lunch. So making sure that they're refueling and staying off their feet as much as possible when out with friends to support that recovery. So just simple things like that a coach can sneakily put in that, these are the things to remember. On Monday there, we have a smaller recovery window between the gym session and mobility. So the smaller recovery window means that nutrition and rest should be of high importance for the athlete. And it's important, as Julianne had emphasized in the last infographic, for athletes to think of blocks of time as opposed to, just Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, because we can see that Monday is very congested. So those things like nutrition, they really need to stay on top of that. Whereas Tuesday, they have a bit more breathing space, that it's not as, for the load that's happening on the Monday, they need to have the additional calories put in on the Monday to compensate for the energy expended during their exercise sessions. Yeah, and below that then, so the recovery checklist, adequate protein at each meal. So with protein, it's really important to spread it out throughout the day. You know, if you're aiming for that 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, and you divide that across 4 or 5 meals, so it's roughly around that 20 or 30 grams. And it's important to feed the muscles regular, so that you're stimulating that muscle protein synthesis, so you're feeding the muscles. Food timing, avoid long periods of fasting, so eating every 3 to 4 hours, and that fits in nicely then with your protein hit as well. Prepare for all training sessions, bring recovery foods such as dairy-based products for bone health. And again, this is something that our coaches can emphasize, you know, checking in with the athletes. Have you got your recovery snacks? Or if they're landing to training sessions early, have they got something for their session? And proceed with caution when using words like heal, detox, cleanse on certain foods or supplements that promise quick results. They should really seek advice from their sports medicine team there. So I think someone asked in the question box there earlier, again, just to go over low energy availability. It's really when there isn't enough energy left over within the body for you to run your bodily systems. So your menstrual function, your bone health, for your brain, for your cardiovascular health. So that whenever there isn't enough energy within the body, things start to break down. So for a female, it's great that they actually have their menstrual cycle, because it's a red flag. If periods stop, then we know something's not right here, and it's solely down to too much exercise or under fueling, or a mixture of both. So too much exercise and not enough food are examples of imbalances in your nutrition, training and recovery. And it is common again among athletes that do a lot of exercise on a daily basis, and sometimes timing is an issue. So timing of training sessions conflicting with those eating opportunities. So it's important to ask yourself, does your eating plan match your training plan? And often, more times than enough, we're creatures of habit. We have probably the same breakfast every day, pretty much a similar lunch, but that doesn't actually increase on those heavy training days. And that's where we need to be a wee bit extra careful and explain that to our athletes, that whenever you're putting in a higher intensity or longer session, you need to make sure that you're fueling to compensate for that energy output. So what do you have after a training session then? So aim for that 20 to 30 grams of quality protein after exercise. So including milks, yogurts, eggs, or if you're going straight home to have your dinner, if it's spaghetti bolognese, if it's your roast dinner, or fish or any lean meats. And then, as I said, if you follow that up, if you have a small snack and then follow that up with a meal, but if you're going straight home, then that's fine as well. And this is something I suppose we use in the Institute as well, as the RPE scale. So it's rate of perceived exertion. And it's basically how tough you found that session. So this will actually help you work out then how much of carbohydrate you may need along with your protein. So for example, here we had a 60-minute session and they didn't find it that tough. So they gave it a 2, and that was 120. So we can see in the green there, 0 to 300, and the 120 would slot in there. Now, keep in mind, this is just a guide. The quarter of a plate of carbs, and that will vary depending on your body weight as well. So just keep that in mind, it's just a guide. And what to do next. So if you can relate to this nutrition training and recovery imbalance, please do speak with your sports physician or your sports nutritionist. And if you don't have any of these, or you don't know who to contact, ask your coach. So that's really to ensure that athletes are aware that they can actually talk to you about this, and hopefully then that you will have the resources or the contacts to put them in the right direction of someone that can actually help them with this as well. And just again, a few of those quotes, the one in the green there, I wake up in the middle of the night really, really hungry, and I had a really important race the next day and it went horribly. So, you know, if an athlete is not sleeping well and it's impacting their sleep, it's a key sign that, you know, they need to eat more, and it's potentially that they didn't fuel before the session properly and then they didn't refuel then after. And going back to that timing piece, it's really important in and around training sessions to ensure that they're getting enough in, and then they're able to eat their proper meals on top of that. Is there another one there, Julianne? The last one, I think. It's just, I suppose, going over that low energy availability piece again, and it's kind of highlighting the impact it has then on our reproductive health. So for a male and female, low energy availability causes a drop in estrogen and a drop in testosterone. So changes in reproductive function for females and changes in sex drive for males. And both these hormones are needed for bone health. So for example, with a female athlete, if there's no estrogen circulating within the system, this means that there's no estrogen available then for your bone health. And then this can put an athlete at greater risk of injuries. So to ensure that they're actually taking in enough calcium and meeting their energy intake. So calcium rich foods like those dairy produce, like your yogurts, your milks, and it doesn't have to be the high protein milks, because milk is a naturally high protein food anyway. So ordinary milk is fine there too. Yeah, and I suppose just to finish off on that section, then some tips for coaches to help manage energy availability. So encourage athletes to eat every 3 to 4 hours. So large gaps between meals can cause low energy availability within a busy training day, so making it harder to meet training and health needs. Check that athletes are eating around training. Are they fueling before, topping up energy with carbs during the longer sessions? And are they eating a recovery meal or snack after training? Eat to match training volume, reminding them that they need to increase their energy intake as the training volume increases, and this will help their body get more out of the training session. Plan ahead. Encourage athletes to make a timetable and get them to highlight where food is important and where it is going to come from. So for example, are they going to be stopping off at the shop on the way home? Are they going to be stopping off the shop beforehand? Are they able to bring a pre-packed lunch? Or if they're still in school, are they going to be eating in the canteen before training? And finally, if feasible, work with a sports nutritionist or dietitian. It'll be useful to work with a sports dietitian to manage energy and their nutritional needs to support their weekly and monthly training phases.
Great, thanks Danielle. So next up is Jessie.
Yeah, so that's where I jump in. So this picture we're looking at here has actually been cut from one of the infographics that was developed as well. So it was the last of the infographics that was more from a psychological point of view. So I said I just cut this a little bit because it's the most relevant to the presentation. So Julianne already highlighted some of the kind of warning signs of RED-S that may present, especially to the physios when they come in, when athletes are coming in with, you know, recurring injuries and niggles and little illnesses. And I suppose from a psychological point of view, things to be looking out for are all signposted here. So those things around irritability, low motivation, sleep disruption, and some kind of more symptoms of maybe mental health issues like anxiety, low mood, depressed mood, and then that kind of fatigue and poor concentration that comes with low energy availability. The difficulty with some of these psychological warning signs is some of these are consistent with injury. So an athlete is presenting with injury, they may, as a result, feel more anxious, have lower mood and lower motivation anyway. So in terms of the warning signs, it's important to look from a whole, you know, from the holistic point of view. Are they more fatigued than they should be? Are they struggling to concentrate, and are they irritable? Because they may be more likely to be signs of RED-S and not necessarily just the injury that may be also a sign of RED-S. So unfortunately, the psychological sides are always a little bit more complicated, and it is tied up with the individual and knowing the individual athlete. So we'll move on to the next slide. And this kind of indicates the challenges of the psychological aspects of RED-S. So in terms of those kind of psychological responses we just saw, those kind of things that point to signs of RED-S, they can be kind of tied up in psychological risk factors that can also lead to RED-S, and we'll talk a bit more about that. So this is the difficulty of needing to know the athlete quite well, understanding individual differences in terms of the psychological risk factors that put some athletes at risk of RED-S may not present in other athletes. So it depends on the athlete, their individual experiences, the context and coping strategies they may have available to them. So that's just why, to explain the cyclical nature of it, it's not always as clear cut. Sorry, go back a couple of slides. Yeah. So I suppose the first of those kind of psychological risk factors is athletic identity. And this is something that is a mediating factor in a lot of issues within sport. So just to explain what athletic identity is, it's basically the degree to which your athlete identifies with their athlete role. So it's how much they identify as an athlete. Do they identify themselves solely as the runner, the hurdler, the athlete? And not only that they identify themselves, but do other people identify them as that? Is that what they're primarily known as? Which is great. Research by Brewer et al. In 1993 called it the Achilles heel or Hercules muscle, because having a strong athletic identity increases athletes' likelihood to persist through challenges and setbacks, to be more motivated to train and to work harder. But on the flip side, it can increase some of these more negative behaviors. So athletes with a stronger athletic identity may be more likely to engage in more perfectionist or obsessive tendencies. So they may be the ones who, if they're told to eat a certain amount of calories, will be very, very strict on that. They may be the ones who will be given a rehab program and they may over adhere to a rehab program and maybe overdo it, and maybe come back too early. These perfectionist tendencies can also lead to feelings of guilt and anxiety when an athlete is missing training. So obviously that can be a risk for an athlete who's been told to pull back because of an injury, or if they are trying to recover from some issues from REDS. And obviously sorry, we can go back one before. Yeah. So not only will there be more perfectionist tendencies and obsessive tendencies, it does lead to more dysfunctional practices. So the disordered eating and overtraining. So these can be issues as well for the athlete. So we can move on now, Julia. So important to consider if you are thinking, I need to understand my athlete's athletic identity. There is a measurement scale just called the Athletic Identity Measurement Scale. You can look up. It's 10 simple questions just to get an understanding of your athlete. I think you probably will have a good idea judging about how the athlete talks about it. And I suppose other psychological implications. So I'm calling them implications because they're not only risk factors, but they're also things that can affect the response to REDS. So the over conformity to kind of norms of the sport. So I think obviously I competed in athletics for a long time. We're aware in each sport there are kind of certain beliefs or norms that are attached to that sport. And with things like athletics, endurance running, endurance sports in general, there are some of these kind of what you might call damaging beliefs attached to the sport. So things like that idea that lighter is faster, that only certain specific body types suit certain events, that you need to be the tall and slim athlete to be a distance runner. You need to be short and powerful and stocky to be a sprinter or a thrower, for example. Something that's probably perpetuated more by society than athletes themselves is the idea that athletes follow strict diets. I know just from personal experience and of having worked with athletes, a lot of them will talk about having, if they're asked in interviews about, it always comes back to how strict they are in their diet and do they follow strict diets. And that comes back to their athletic identity, that they need to be seen to be following a strict diet because that's what athletes should follow. So again, it's a norm of the sport, it's not necessarily fact. The idea of pushing your body to its limit. So someone who, over conforms to these norms, you might behave in a way that's consistent to that. So, that idea of you have to push your body to the limit, you need to be training at 100% all the time, might be a message that they believe is consistent with being an elite athlete and then behave in a way that's consistent with that. So maybe pushing through pain barriers, pushing through injuries, maybe underreporting pain, and maybe trying to compete or train when they are underfueled and not feeling that they have the energy. So pushing that body to its limit. And then that idea of race weight, which we're all aware of, that athletes have this idea that I perform at a certain race weight because in the past they have performed at that race weight and not taken into account changes in their body and in their age and in, all the different changes that can occur. So there are a lot of these norms that happen. Not everyone will buy into them, but there is, if athletes are going to overconform to those norms, they may be more likely to put themselves at risk at REDS if they are going to buy in and kind of behave in a consistent manner. Sorry, Julianne, you can flick it on. So there was a lot of mention in the comments earlier about body image and social media as well. And I suppose that kind of is a sign of the times that we're in and of how relevant these two things are to our understanding of REDS, athletes' experiences of REDS, and how we kind of can, you know, work with an athlete with REDS. And I think body image is one of the most challenging aspects, because athletes, no matter what level they are, what age they are probably having to negotiate competing demands depending on, you know, their performance, say for example, performance versus aesthetics. So an athlete could be performing in a, you know, at a high level, but they don't maybe fit the archetypal athlete body for that sport. And that creates cognitive dissonance. And basically what cognitive dissonance is that mental discomfort of trying to balance the values and their beliefs. So they believe that an athlete should look like this, but I need to look like this, perform, that's what suits me. You see it and hear it a lot in comments about, you know, what the ideal marathon runner looks like, what the ideal 5K runner looks like, and, you know, comments about someone who's in the 1500 who's more muscular than the rest. And this not only falls in the sports context, but outside of that, we are working with athletes who are not just athletes, they're also people, and they're, you know, we know there's a vast amount you're working with juveniles, so they're developing those kind of social circles, they're in school, there's hormonal changes. So they're not only trying to conform to the ideal body type for their sport, which can be a challenge, but they may not conform, their body type may conform to their sports specific body type, but it may not then conform to what's the ideal for outside of sport. So that can create that further cognitive dissonance, that further kind of discomfort when they're trying to fit into different kind of body types that they don't quite fit into. So in terms of body image, athletes are, you know, there's a vast amount of research that would suggest that athletes do have some troubling body image issues, no matter the age, no matter the sport. And it is observed in males as well as females, because a lot of this would be assumed that it's just in female athletes. Unfortunately, male athletes experiences it as well. It's just not maybe as well reported, so we don't have the same amount of numbers, just stigma towards, you know, admitting that you have body image issues as a man might actually be obstructing our actual true knowledge of the kind of the rates and the prevalence. But body image is an issue for athletes when they are trying to fit into these different roles, depending on, you know, what role they're trying to fit at the time. And obviously social media, we can't escape it. It can be the best thing in the world, and it can also be the worst, because it can perpetuate these body image issues with athletes. A recent study by Wilch et al. Found that athletes with multiple social media accounts, which most athletes that you're working with probably do, we're talking Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, anywhere where there's kind of images are shared. There was rates, now this was not done in just general adolescents rather than athletes, but this definitely can be applied to athletes, is that disordered eating rates were higher among athletes with multiple social media accounts. So multiple places for them to share images of themselves and to also compare images of themselves to others. So while this happens in adolescence, this is happening with athletes comparing themselves to other athletes and the ideal athlete body type. So social media can be a minefield. So the behaviors that was found in this research was increased disordered eating behaviors, maybe stricter exercise, and over-evaluation of the body, which is probably the most relevant to our athlete population, that they're over-evaluating their body based on what they're seeing in comparison. So again, you're depending on where they're trying to fit, what role they're trying to fill, and comparing their body to that. Are they saying that they don't have a six-pack like the other athletes, or are they saying that their shoulders are too broad for the normal population? Sorry, yeah, you can move on, Julianne, that was perfect timing. And of course, we are dealing with coaches here, and unfortunately, coaches have a really important role for athletes. And it's important to recognize that this might not always be a good thing. So perceived coach, and I'm saying perceived, that's a really important word here, is that coach expectation and pressure can be perceived by the athlete even if the coach doesn't intend to. So a study in 2015 found that nearly a third of the athletes believed that body weight and body image was important to their coach. This was just the belief of the athlete. This was their perception. It wasn't necessarily the fact or the belief of the coach. So it's important to recognize the influence that you as a coach can have on your athlete. And this is in terms of intentional and unintentional comments. So intentional comments might not, might be well placed, saying that you tend to run a little bit faster, or in the summer you'll be at your race weight, or, when you've lost that extra bit of, winter weight, you will run that bit faster. Those are well-intended comments, but can be taken up differently by the athlete depending on the athlete and how important they perceive weight. And then there's the unintentional comments mentioning in passing, comments about, diet and weight, making reference to someone and their appearance, the way they look, and that they look a bit lighter, a bit heavier, things like that. And I think there can be that reinforcement by coaches of the damaging beliefs that we mentioned, and those kind of norms and damaging kind of norms that it can be attached to sport can be reinforced by a coach, again, completely unintentionally. So Siobhan, who's going to be in our next webinar, is going to talk about the language used around this, because it can be a really tricky area, and it can be quite important for athletes, and you have to realize an athlete is hanging on your every word, unfortunately. So for your athlete, especially if you're working with an athlete that might have come from a different group, so if you're working with maybe college age or athletes in their 20s, if they've had a previous experience of pressure from a previous coach, they will then be more likely to perceive pressure from their current coach. So if they had experiences with a previous coach where they felt there was weight pressure and pressure on body image, they may be more likely to pick up future references to that as pressure. What's good to know that is, if you have a good athlete, a relationship with your athlete, this can reduce the negative impact by talking to them, communicating them, be really clear on your messaging. So if you have a good athlete relationship with your athlete and you're able to talk to them and communicate with them, that's a way of kind of, reducing the potentially negative impact of that perceived pressure. So I suppose I've talked to you a lot about what the issues are, but I suppose you're sitting there thinking, what can I do? And just like Danielle gave us some really good tips to take away, hopefully you guys can take some too from this. So the first thing I say is ask, don't tell. I think when we think of, when I look at the behavior change research, we think about anti-smoking campaigns and the awful pictures you see on cigarette boxes. Unfortunately, that hasn't stopped people smoking. People know that things are good for them, and people will have a knowledge that things are bad for them, and that's not necessarily enough to change a behavior. So instead of telling someone they need to eat more because it will make them run faster or perform better, sometimes it's about understanding the athlete and understanding their beliefs. And this is drawn from motivational interviewing in psychology. So rather than telling an athlete what they need to do, it's about trying to talk to them and understanding why they think something, because sometimes their beliefs can be so deep-seated, like we said. If they've come from a previously pressurized environment, they believe all of these cultural norms from within their sport. Simply telling them that they need to eat 500 calories more a day is probably not going to do much to their actual behavior. So understanding talking to your athlete, what do they actually think and believe when it comes to eating more, when it comes to being a certain race weight, or having to look like everyone else, that I don't look like everyone else in my event. Discuss why it is they think that and understand it. Discuss what they think, discuss why they think it, because we need to understand not only what athletes believe, but what the reasons are behind it, because it's very hard to change behavior if you don't know why it's happening. So sometimes athletes may not have ever thought about why they believe this, why they think they need to fit this certain body type, or why they need to look like this or eat this much in order to perform. A belief has come from somewhere, and sometimes it's about understanding it. And there's a term in motivational interviewing in psychology called rolling resistance. So you probably will meet resistance from your athlete if you are telling them to that, like we said at the start, to eat more, because again, it's probably going against a lot of the beliefs that they have built up. And resistance often stems from fear. It doesn't necessarily just stem from stubbornness. It stems from a fear of, if I do this, what will it do? Is it going to completely go against all of the things that I believe in? Express some empathy, understand that why they are resistant, and express that empathy and be patient with the athlete. And a way to do it, instead of trying to change their behavior, try to figure out what their values and their goals are. So is it that they want to run fast? Is it that they want to be able to do 6 training sessions a week while they're studying, for example? What are their priorities and goals? And is their current behavior, so this idea of developing discrepancy, is what your current behavior, is that long-term going to match up with what your goals are? And is there actually discrepancy? Is there some mismatch between what they're currently doing and where they want to be? So for example, they want to be able to train twice a day, 4 times a week, like the rest of the athletes in their 20s, for example. When they finish in school, they want to graduate to elite athlete level training, but they're not fueling enough, or they're feeling too fatigued to even be able to do 1 training session a day. Is that sustainable? So just try to, really highlight what their goals are, and really question, and this is to get the athlete to think about, is this something that is sustainable for me? So rather than like that, you're not telling, but you're planting the kind of seed for them to think about it. So hopefully those are some ideas. So I don't want to scare everyone away. As a coach, you are in a really blessed position that you have a huge amount of influence on your athlete. It doesn't have to be used in the wrong way. There's ways around that, and there's ways of undoing things that might be said unintentionally. So there's just some tips to take away. So that is all from me. I put some references there in case anyone's interested in doing a bit more nerding and research on it. I didn't think so, but there is some papers there if anyone's interested. So I think we can just open the floor to questions. I think everyone's on mute though.
Sorry, I was in the zone.
No, you're fine. Okay.
I think there's a question, maybe Danielle's best place to ask there, around should vitamin D supplements be recommended to athletes to potentially help nutrition absorption?
I suppose vitamin D is one of those micronutrients that in Ireland, where we're situated on the equator, we don't get enough direct sunlight, and that's our best source of vitamin D. So between October and March of every year, everyone should be taking a vitamin D supplement, irrespective if you're an athlete or, an adult exercise, recreationally active individual. But yeah, that will help. But if they are taking fortified foods like Avamore super milk, some breads have vitamin D. But yeah, we would recommend between the months of October and March of each year to be taking a vitamin D supplement. Everyone's very quiet.
I think a lot of these questions are for you, Danielle.
How do I patients on vegan diets, replacing normal milk with plant-based, etc.?
I was going to say, while Danielle's reading those, Jessie, would you have any insights on how coaches can help overcome the pressures of social?
Yeah, that's the golden question, Matt, and I wish I could say for sure. I suppose the first thing I'd say is we can't stop it. Social media is here. Athletes are on their phones all the time. It's such a big part of it. So I think trying not to tell athletes to go off social media, first of all, and kind of accept that it is there. But maybe, again, it's that questioning why, what is it about social media that's worrying you? Because usually that social media stress is probably coming from looking at what other athletes are doing, what they look like, how they look in their kit, what training they're doing. From a psychological point of view, we always talk about focusing on what you can control and bring it back to, okay, well, what are you doing that they're also doing? Okay, what are you doing that maybe they're not able to do? So rather than trying to stop them making the comparisons, kind of say, okay, that's great. What do you think? They look like they're doing that. So are you, or what do you think your strengths are that, you maybe just don't show on social media? There's no way this is the age old thing. Comparisons are going to happen. And it's very, very hard to stop it. So it's about trying to bring it back, the focus back to themselves, and say, what have you got that you're good at? This person is putting stuff up on social media. They're not putting up the bad days. They're only putting up when they look their best and they're training their best. So yeah, I think again, it's that idea of rolling with the resistance. There's going to be resistance to social media is not going anywhere. So you need to roll with social media and try not to resist it and just accept it. I think we all do. So I think Danielle had a chance to read the the question
here. Now, so we'll just what about patients on vegan diets replacing normal milk with plant milks? I suppose the thing with plant milks is they have a lower protein content than the likes of normal milk or soy milk. And also they are fortified with micronutrients as well and minerals. So, you know, where milk has these naturally occurring. So we don't actually know how well the body is absorbing the likes of calcium, the likes of vitamin D from a product that's been fortified. So it's more, I would opt for the soy milk before oat milk or coconut milk or anything like that. The next one, can you talk about protein shakes, bars? Can normal foods provide sufficient protein? Yeah, the likes of protein shakes and the protein bars, there's also a lot of alcohol sugars in those as well. And they're also very high in fiber. So you can imagine if you're a runner and you're taking a protein bar before training, how that's going to affect the gut. So these are the types of things we need to be mindful of. Protein shakes, again, I'll go back to a food source, the likes of soy milk or milk. You know, you're getting so much more than just protein if you take the milk option, because it has been fortified or it has nutrients, additional nutrients added into it. So you definitely can get your food first is always the best way, because you get so much more bang for your buck. You get more than just the nutrient that they're advertising, whether it be a protein bar or protein shake. Next one, have you come across an athlete with low blood pressure which looked like reds? No, I haven't personally, but from the literature, the work done by Milan et al. In Norway, they would have found that those endurance training females that presented with menstrual irregularities and lower bone mineral density also presented with lower blood pressure, lower glucose, and a lower RMR. So it is potentially a red flag, but I would take that in conjunction with other factors like menstrual function, like the results of a DEXA scan. I wouldn't just look at that as a solely red flag for reds. I have a female middle distance athlete who does not like dairy. What do you suggest? I suppose dairy would just be recommended because it's so convenient and it's just one of those things you can grab and go after training. But the likes of soy milk or, you know, fortified orange juice, you know, having fortified options throughout your day, like if they're having cereal in the morning, fortified cereals like cornflakes or Rice Krispies or something like that. Dark green leafy vegetables, they also have calcium, but you would need to eat, I suppose, an awful lot of them to get the calcium you'd get from dairy. So if you had it distributed across your meals, and then also opt for the likes of soy milk after a session. But you can also get, is it a dairy intolerance? I'm not sure here, or is it they just don't like dairy? Because there's also lactose-free milk and things like that that they can opt for as well. Sardines, I don't know if they'll be into that, but they're also a good source of calcium. So it's just making sure that there's other options available at meal times if it's not potentially what they're going to get after training. So for example, after training, they might have a chicken salad wrap or a different type of sandwich to ensure that they're getting their protein as well. Is there any definite measure or test of reds, or is there multiple factors that indicate reds? I suppose it's, if we were looking at testing for reds, we would need accurate dietary intakes, and that can be extremely hard when you have athletes that's potentially training twice a day and you're trying to get them to keep a dietary record in the middle of that. So it's not, I suppose, the most feasible for some of them. We also need an accurate estimate of their exercise energy expenditure, which is also quite difficult to do. And then we'd also need to assess their body composition. So I suppose when you look at those three things and the limitations associated with each of those, looking at the factors like menstrual function, their injury history, their GI function, taking those things into account would give us a far better handle on if they're at risk of low energy availability, if that makes sense. on a lot of your infographics, you suggest dairy for bone health. Should we offer an alternative calcium not for people with non? Yes, so like those that I said, like fortified orange juice, sardines, getting your calcium at meal times, adding in green leafy vegetables, and then your fortified cereals as well in the morning. To what extent would you involve the athlete's GP in the diagnosis and management of RED-S? They would be involved, I'd say, from the get-go, in terms of, you know, if it's assessing menstrual function, just check their bloods. That'll be a good starting point, but it is a multidisciplinary team approach depending on how that athlete presents. So, for example, if an athlete's constantly on the physio bed with Julianne and they're not getting on top of their injuries, or if, like, Jessie's picking up the mood and irritable signs and symptoms, so it's not necessarily that they will present to the GP straight away, but it'll be another practitioner that will pick up those signs and symptoms.
We had that case as well, Danielle, last week where we came across a GP with a teenage athlete who didn't have any awareness of fueling, and the GP's suggestion to help the issue was just to put the girl on the pill to try and restore her menstrual function. So that was a big like red flag moment for us. So I suppose,
yes, well, that's the important part there, is nearly a sports science or a sports physician, as opposed to your medical practitioner, that they're aware of RED-S and aware of low energy availability.
I suppose we were just lucky that the physio we had on the team on the ground had the awareness. So she was able to contact the GP and she kind of like shared some information with them and stuff like that. And it's helped massively in that case. Now, we did get the blood profile done and everything as well, but that was one that could have gone totally wrong had the physio not reached out to the GP as well. So sometimes that awareness isn't there, unfortunately. So that's where like the coach comes in, and the coach is very important to flag these issues and to be aware. If they hear of their athlete like going on the pill to try and solve a problem like that, well, that's not a solution. It's only putting a band-aid on, and it's going to lead to bigger issues down the road. Sorry, that's my 2 cents on that one.
Thanks, Julia. Where are we at here? Is there also a set period of time of intervention before the athlete returns to normal if they have LEA? Again, it will depend on how the athlete presents. If, for example, the athlete hasn't menstruated in a year, that could vary depending on how well she takes on the advice that the psychologist and the nutritionist is giving her. Is she able to take in these additional calories? You know, is there any underlying eating disorder issues there? So it really depends on the individual. But if they're open and are aware of the changes that they need to make, and are fully on board with getting in these additional calories, then the literature would show potentially 9 to 12 months for return of menses. But again, Julianne would know better from an injury perspective with low energy availability if it was a severe injury. Julianne, I don't know if you've anything to add there.
Well, most of the time it will start presenting more as niggles, but definitely when it comes to a bony injury, like it has to be part of your factor for an assessment. You have to look at their fueling, because they wouldn't just get a bony injury out of the blue unless it was a traumatic. You know, if it was a stress fracture, you have to look at their training load over the block of time beforehand, and then also look at their correlation of their fueling, because when the two of them don't match, that's when a stress fracture comes along. So if you keep increasing that training load and they're not fueling their body enough to recover, that's when the bony health will start to deteriorate. And it generally is the direct result of inadequate fueling. Traumatic fractures happen, say, off a bike or a skiing accident or something like that, but a bony stress reaction is a consistent overload without recovery. That answers the question.
I'm just thinking that Danielle has had to answer loads of questions in a row, so maybe to give her a break, I've just spotted one that might be more related to me from Colette, that if you know the athlete is not eating enough, as they're all about body image, which we understand, and have headaches or fainting episodes, how do you get around explaining that to them they need to eat more without telling them? Really, it's a difficult question, Colette. You're in a difficult situation, and I suppose it's going back to what I said in that last slide about getting the athlete to kind of, what are their beliefs and understanding of the situation? I mean, what is more important to them, looking kind of relatively slim in a picture, or actually being able to will go through a normal day without fainting or having a headache, you know. So maybe pointing them and, you know, trying to inform them about, rather than telling them they need to eat more, informing them about what maybe their headaches or fainting is caused by. So if they're trying to train at a high level, you know, are they fueled enough? So it's not necessarily that you're telling them to, but maybe these are some of the reasons why maybe an athlete, that I had an athlete like this before. You know, this is a way you could kind of, rather than pointing it at them, say, you know, I had an athlete in the group before who had something similar, and it turns out that, you know, she was eating too far away from her training session. You know, you can kind of drop hints in terms of, if you're trying not to be very direct in terms of you need to eat more. But again, it's balancing their beliefs. What do they think? Maybe they don't realize that, you know, eating before training is actually important. You know, I know they're all about the body image, but they're going to be burning off an awful lot of energy by just training alone. So they're probably not, unless they're sitting around doing nothing, they aren't really going to be putting on huge weight by eating more to be able to sustain their training. So yeah, trying to get an understanding of what their beliefs are and why they think they're fainting and why they think they're having headache episodes, rather than trying to intervene and tell them to eat more, is to get a bit more conversation going around it. It's a tough one though. I don't, you know, there's no easy answer in that situation. And again, if you probably have a better knowledge of how that athlete would respond, and sometimes it might be getting more people involved than just you in that situation. Yeah, probably no easy answer in that situation, I'm afraid. The next one there, is it advisable to encourage athletes in the 16 to 20 age group to embrace sports science available if they're trying to become a high performance athlete? And I suppose there's 3 sports science disciplines sitting here, so I think yeah,
like they're all part of, like, the key thing to remember as well, like their support team. Like, so we are the support around the coach and the athlete. Like, we're there to fill in gaps in knowledge. We're there for support in that area. We're not kind of the telling you what to do. It's more like, if you're identifying a problem or there's an issue there, like, reach out to, if you have access to a support team, like, reach out. That's where people are, that's why we're there to help. Like, we study these things for a reason. We like them, we're interested in them, so we're there to help out where we can.
Yeah. And I think from my point of view, when it comes to psychology, often by the time an athlete does decide to come and work with a psychologist, they're a little bit older that age bracket, and maybe have formed beliefs about what they need and don't need, and what psychology can do for them or help them, or form the belief that they don't believe in psychology. So I think sometimes, you know, in those early developmental years, someone like physio is going to always be seen as important to nutritionists, and sometimes a psychologist isn't seen as someone that's needed until there's a problem. So I think, you know, if an athlete kind of develops a really healthy understanding of what all the sports science does, rather than just problem fixers, you know, develop that from an early age, you know, they're probably going to use them as they go forward, and have a better understanding of what high performance sport looks like if they are bringing them into their wider support team early on.
It's an interesting one there from Peter Vincent about the dangers of antibiotics affecting the immune system, and if they feel that you can get enough vital vitamins from the natural foods when in the midst of a tough or demanding training cycle. So I guess if somebody needs to go on an antibiotic, it's because they have an infection. So they'll have elevated temperature and they won't be able to train because they'll be sick. So that's a sign that somebody either just picked up a bug, or they might just naturally have a lower immune system. So there can be a few things, like we did flag, if somebody's getting recurrent illnesses like colds or bugs or like stomach issues, it can be down to a fueling issue. Some people just might naturally have weaker immune systems, and they might always, when the new winter bug comes around, pick it up and end up having to miss a couple of weeks on antibiotics. And we would see it with our swimming cohort quite a lot, like they would be quite susceptible to picking up bugs. But that's just where preparing for the winter and making sure that they are, if they do need to go on some of those supplements to help boost their immune system, like that they work with a dietitian or a nutritionist around that. And it's not necessarily that the antibiotics are dangerous, like you do have to treat the infection and they need to recover properly, but they need to go on a probiotic then afterwards to help their immune system recover, so that their gut health can recover after the use of the antibiotic. So that's where nutritionists will help hugely in that respect. So yeah, you do have to treat the infection. What do you think there, Danielle?
I would agree. It's the colds and flus, it's those minor immune suppressive issues that where nutrition may play a role, but as you say, if someone needs a dose of antibiotics that's a bit more severe than your minority stuff, then yeah, so be it, they need it. Where was I looking there? Oh yeah, do males, females have the same protein carb percentage breakdown with their nutrition whilst in hard training as competing in the same events? Yeah, well, I suppose everybody's needs depends on their body weight, and body weight, their height, and I suppose how much training they're actually doing. So for example, whenever I say about the 20 to 30 grams protein, you know, that's what you would need in that one sitting versus, you know, I'm not explaining this very well. So if you're a 50 kg female, you need roughly, say, multiply that by 2. So you need 100 grams of protein. If you're a 60 kg male, you'll need 120 grams of protein. Divide that then across your meals. So if you're having 3 to 4 meals a day, divide that out. So you're getting roughly 20 to 30 grams at each meal. And that will vary depending on if you're the 50 kg or the 60 kg athlete, if that makes sense. Again, with your carbohydrates as well. So depending on your weight, multiplied by 6 to 10, depending on how much training you're doing. So an endurance athlete would recommend between 6 to 10 grams per kilogram of body weight. 6 being on the lower end if you're not doing as much training on one day. And then if you have a really high training day, that needs to be up to 10 to make sure that you have enough carbohydrate or fuel in the system to withstand the training that you're doing. So it all really depends on your body weight, if that makes sense. Are there optimal times for training? Early morning, late evenings? How does diet need to vary if athletes are training early mornings? If athletes are training early mornings, the evening before is really important. And then ensuring then the morning, if it means getting up half an hour earlier to have half a banana, or if it's not feasible, if you just don't feel like eating, having like something like in your pocket or on the sideline available to you just to either snack on, or if it's a carbohydrate drink, just something available during that session to top up your carbohydrate store. So if you're not a big fan of eating early in the morning, then the meal the evening before needs to be sufficient to support that early morning training. If an athlete doesn't have enough dairy in their diet, would a calcium supplement be recommended? Yeah, that's an option as well. Sure that, you know, if you're eating enough and eating a variety of foods, you should be getting enough of every.
I think we've lost Danielle.
Maybe a question for Julianne. The stress factors are maybe in the body and
so the correlation
in the body and
yeah, and that's 100% is, yeah. So some people could be might have lower bone density than others, depending on their nutrition growing up. But there is, yeah, a direct. So if you're constantly under fueling, your bone health will suffer as a result. And especially then if you're in endurance sport where you're getting that repetitive load and you're trying to train with higher mileage, you are going to get higher stress through the bone, and it'll start off first as like bony tenderness, a bony stress reaction that then develops into weakness in the bone, and you start to get a stress fracture. You then have to try and deload, they recover, they get their nutrition in, the bony health improves, and then they're building back up again, and the same pattern causes again. So it's about trying to break that cyclical effect and trying to re-educate athletes and coaches around that awareness. You know, this person is different to others. Like not every athlete is the same. We all know that. So it's just making sure that everybody takes in that individual approach in their recovery so that they don't constantly get recurring stress fractures. And you do see that in athletes, you know, one season they have a navicular fracture, the next season they have a tibial fracture, the next season they have something else. And you're just like banging your head off the wall a little bit, because it is primarily a recovery and fueling issue that they're just getting these recurrent bony issues, unfortunately.
And if they get a bone scan, the bone density might vary depending on their sport. Is that right, Julia?
Yeah. Yeah, it can do, definitely.
In the areas of the body that are.
Yeah. Sorry, your connection's just.
So I think distance runners, so they've got a lot of load at the left, haven't they?
Sorry, your thing was breaking up there a little bit.
Sorry.
Say it again, Matt.
I was just going to say, with distance runners, often they put a bit of bloating through the legs, and
yeah,
there's
is it just me?
No, I think it's like it's coming to a certain time of night that everyone's just starting to break up. So I'll cover that last question for Maria. Many athletes are reacting to issues at home. It's very difficult for the coach to address the home issues.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Matt, do you want to finish your question there? I was just jumping on because I think
work away, Jeff.
Yeah, no, I just think it's a really interesting question for Maria, and I think it could be something a lot of coaches are thinking, is that coach isn't everything to the athlete. And there are, like Maria said here, is that athletes are bringing things that are going on at home and stresses that are going on at home to training, and that's a really difficult place for a coach to be. And there's there can be a lot of expectations on a coach to solve everything, and that's not your role. Your role is to help your athlete to perform, and sometimes you may have more than that, sometimes you may have just that. So if you are having issues with if your athlete is bringing issues to the training session, if there's stuff going on at home, sometimes your training session might be that outlet that they really need. So making the focus about performance and just enjoyment can be really, really important. And if they're not enjoying the performance, if they're not enjoying training because they're not performing, because they're not eating well, sometimes something that can be actually taking away from it. So I suppose it's about weighing up what your role is, and that's why we asked at the start what your role is, because you aren't everything to everyone. So I think it's important to recognize that sometimes you can't do everything and you can only do your best, and just trying to understand your role is valuable, but you can't do everything for your athletes. So that's important to note. Sorry, something else is coming in.
Sorry guys, that I say everybody's logging in to watch Meghan and Harry here in the north.
Yeah.
We probably better wrap it up there.
Yeah.
So we're very grateful to have the expertise of three service providers, Jessie, Julianne, and Danielle, from respectively from psychology, physio, and nutrition. So because it is an area where you do, as a coach, sometimes you need to turn to support from different disciplines. So tomorrow we'll email the attendees particularly with some nutrition contacts if you do feel you need some more support. But it's a big area, and really we've only introduction really here. So that's why it's a 3 workshop series. So hopefully we'll see you again over the next 2 sessions. The next one we'll look at maybe some of the challenges when it becomes really problematic, the underfueling. And then the last session we have perspective for the first 20 minutes, and then a panel really situation talking about the role of the coach and what you can do, hopefully to initially move to more of a culture of prevention, and then early intervention, and where to go if you do need more support. But big thanks to so many of you for joining us tonight and tuning in to make sure you can best support your athletes.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks to all the presenters.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for all the questions.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.